Welcome to Archive West Texas. I'm your host, Gordon Wilkerson. We're pleased today to be joined by Phil and David Simpson, two native Lubbockites who had a major role in the founding and the operating of Republic Gypsum Company. The Republic Gypsum Company story and the Simpson family story were key to Lubbock's industrial growth in the second half of the 20th century. It's a story of entrepreneurship, risk, legacy, grounded in West Texas grit and values, and we're pleased today to have David and Phil with us to share this story. Thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Also want to give a shout out to Thomas Dye, our producer, the man that makes this show happen. Republic Gypsum is in so many ways a story of the Simpson family. Tell us a little bit about your family roots and how the Simpsons made their way from Avenger in East Texas out to Lubbock.
Avenger's 450 miles east of Lubbock. And I made the trip by automobile many times. And the relationship started when my father was young in the mid-20s. And he went to Lubbock to enroll at Texas Tech. Problem is that it was just then getting started. I don't think classes started until right after he went there. But it was so early that to get a job, the Tech hired him to superintend a bonfire in the tower that still had Tech. On the administration building, 2 towers, and they were laying brick in there, and the mortar was wet between the brick, so they needed some warmness from a fire to keep it from freezing. So that was his job then. And then he went back there several years later, and I went back several years later, and attended Tech. And I was actually a professor there for a while, a professor of history. So that's the relationship between Lubbock and we had a business there. It's called Avenger Lumber Company, named after our sawmill in East Texas, a little town called Avenger, Avinger. And we sold lumber and building materials and gypsum wallboard there. And Lubbock was booming in those days. By this time, we're in the 40s, and we're in the post-World War II years, and there was a high demand for housing. And so my father started out building ready-built houses, real small at first. They were used by farmers to put up itinerant labor. Then that expanded over the years to much larger size houses, which were transported on house moving rigs, sometimes as far as 200 miles. And so you had the advantage of access to materials all together in one place, and labor in Lubbock. And then you move it out to the ultimate destination. You think about it. If you want to build a house in Dimmitt, Texas, there are not many people there accomplished in the building trades. And so Lubbock had a concentration of building trades. So that's the relationship, and we've maintained our ties there for many years.
What do you remember about some of those earliest days in Lubbock as your family began to put down roots there? You all had a house, I think, over on Dixie Drive, and then you had your business operating over on East Broadway. Describe that for our listeners.
It's interesting that our first location was right across the street from the fairgrounds, and just about a block from where Wilkerson cold storage or Wilkerson storage was. So So we were neighbors at that time, and I, I was friends with Gordon's father and mother.
What kind of work did you do before Republic Gypsum that gave you a business background that shaped your early years?
Really nothing. I'm a one company man. I'll get to that story here in a minute. And I'm full of stories. Our lumber company in later years moved from East Broadway to East 34th Street, 34th and A. There was a restaurant there called the Longhorn Cafe, and that's where the local businessmen would gather and exchange stories. And that was a nice thing to do. I mean, that was before almost all businesses had coffee machines. And so you got acquainted with your neighbors. And so we were sitting there with mainly the staff of Avenger Lumber Company, which would have been my father and brother and uncle. And so conversation died down a little bit, and my father looked over at me directly, eye contact. I want a gypsum plant. And it shocked me a little bit because I said, "What is that?" He said, "Well, gypsum's a generic name of gypsum board, commonly called sheetrock, which is a trademark name." And so I got to work. And then it soon became evident after that was my job, was to help my father build and construct and operate a gypsum company, which we called Republic Gypsum.
It's a good time for us to take a quick break. I want to remind our listeners that if you have a suggestion for a future guest on Archive West Texas, please email us at info@classical1057.org. We'll be right back with Phil Simpson. Welcome back to Archive West Texas. We're continuing our conversation with Phil Simpson, founder of Republic Gypsum Company. In our last segment, he told us a little bit about how his family made it from Avenger, Texas to Lubbock, and how they began business in Lubbock as Avenger Lumber Company. And when we ended the last segment, he had just described his father's desire to obtain a gypsum plant and how that became his job. So once that became your job, how did you go about getting that gypsum plant?
We first, my first remembrance about the gypsum business is that we took a vacation to Roswell, New Mexico, which is near Hobbs, and there's a large national monument there called the White Sands National Monument. The White Sands is a very interesting several hundred-acre expanse of gypsum sand dunes, or gypsum dunes, pure white. And so that's very close to where the first atomic bomb was exploded. And I remember when we were there, we we thought we may be examined by the FBI. It didn't get that far along, but anyway. So we shoveled several loads full of shovelfuls of gypsum sand into these wash tubs, brought it back to Lubbock. There we pulled it in, put a shovelful or half shovelful into the oven in our kitchen, my mother's kitchen, and turned the heat up. That's called calcining gypsum. At a certain temperature, like 300 degrees Fahrenheit, gypsum turns into what is commonly known as plaster of Paris, which is chemically very similar to gypsum, but just does not have the combined water. So one thing you do is what we did in the kitchen, we would mix some of that plaster of Paris with some water, which then recombines with the plaster of Paris and it turns back into gypsum and turns back into a solid. And of course, as children would do, what you do is you put your fingerprints down in the wet patty and then it dries and then you have a replica of the end of your fingers. So he was interested in that several decades before we actually got into the business. What got us into the business is we noticed the high profit margins of the gypsum producers, which were called the United States Gypsum Company, National Gypsum Company, Flint Coat, Georgia Pacific, etc. Very large companies. And they all had very attractive profit margins. So that attracted my father. And so that's about the time he said to me at the Longhorn Cafe, I want a gypsum plant. Well, the problem is a gypsum plant costs several $1 million. And so it became my job to help determine where a plant would be built, who would build it, and how to finance it. So I became a one company man then for the next 40 some odd years. So we built the plant, and it wasn't in Lubbock. Transportation economics have a lot to do with where you build a plant like this.
How did you determine to build it in Duke, Oklahoma? Because there's not a lot in Duke, Oklahoma when you're out there looking at building a plant there.
No, there's a Methodist church and a Baptist church, and that's about it. Now a high school.
Okay.
And the nearest town is called Altus. It's a medium-sized town, and so but very good gypsum deposits near Duke. And so we heard about that from some of the local people, and they introduced us to somebody. Kaiser Gypsum had come close to building a plant there years before, and so we came into possession through a local industrial development person named Bob Harbison of a copy of their study. That was very helpful. And we would have done all of that ourselves, but it was done by Kaiser. Kaiser was an enormous industrial company, not known for gypsum. They did have one plant in New Mexico called Kaiser Gypsum. And I'm sure that if they had built the plant in Duke, it would have been called Kaiser Gypsum as well. And so we had to finance the plant. And so we hired two engineering companies to help us design and then estimate the cost, which was approximated $4 million. Some greatly beyond our resources at the time. And so we learned about some industrial development financial projects at that time. The most interesting was the United States Area Redevelopment Administration, ARA. This was started up in the first Kennedy administration. The idea is to preserve jobs in local areas. At that time, young men in smaller towns like Duke or Altus, southwestern Oklahoma, there were no jobs for them there. So they'd have to move to Chicago or Minneapolis or somewhere to get a job. So the idea of the ARA get jobs going in development areas. And so they offered liberal financial terms, not the cash itself, but the financial terms. And so we applied to them and we received approval for our application for a $4 million plant with a loan USARA of 2.6 million. But then we were obligated to raise the other 1.5 million. One requirement of the ARA is that they required local finance people to invest 10% of the cost of the project, which was a wise decision. We had the pharma company called Sooner Southwest Development Co. Inc. And it raised $400,000 from local investors. That was first the Simpsons invested the equity capital in common stock. And then came the investment from the Oklahoma Industrial Finance Authority, OIFA. And then after that came the second and third mortgage from the ARA and also the Oklahoma Industrial Finance Authority. Thank goodness for all these local authorities.
There you go.
And then the final one was, most of you will smile at this. The first mortgage was held by Oklahoma City Bank, Central Bank, and they had a first mortgage on a $400,000 on a $4 million plant. So they were pretty well off, you might say.
Yes, they were. Let's take another quick break. Thanks for sharing with us how Republic Gypsum was originally capitalized. We'll take a quick break. I want to remind our listeners that all of our archived West Texas episodes, including this show, are available on demand on our station app and also on our website at classical1057.org. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more from Phil Simpson. Welcome back to Archive West Texas. We're joined today by Phil Simpson, and in this segment we're going to talk about exploring the early growth years at Republic Gypsum Company. You talked a little bit about how the plant in Duke was financed. I wanted to ask, did you buy all the gypsum deposits? Did you own the land? And how many years of gypsum were on site in the land that you owned in Duke?
Well, the gypsum was, I'd say, 100 feet deep. Not all gypsum, but dirt and gypsum down 100 feet. And so we bought two, 200 acres, which was the basic gypsum deposit. We actually bought more gypsum than it. Almost everything in the area of Duke, Oklahoma is subterranean, has subterranean deposits of gypsum.
So that plant continues to operate today, and there's still gypsum available as raw material for
Yes.
gypsum wallboard.
The actually quarry that we used in the initial years took care of our needs for, say, 5 years, but we owned more land around that. And so for 20 some odd years, we mined in the immediate area of Duke, Oklahoma.
So you've got your plant, you've got your raw material, and all of a sudden you're producing gypsum wallboard. Tell us about building a sales network, developing a customer base, getting your distribution in order. How did you meet all those challenges?
At that time, the big gypsum companies, they delivered wallboard in flat cars to larger lumber companies. And which a flat car of gypsum board is equivalent to about 4 truckloads of gypsum board.
So one rail flat car is about 4 times larger than a truckload of gypsum.
Yeah. And so from the very time when we decided that we'd make direct job site deliveries and deliveries to small lumber yards. Sometimes small lumber yards didn't have direct access to the big gypsum companies because they didn't have rail sidings. And so they'd have to go to a team track local and then offload there off the flat cars and put it on a local delivery truck. So by offering job site deliveries and deliveries to small dealers, we had an edge over the big.
You were providing a level of service that the larger companies were not.
Yeah, that's right. And these bigger companies, they didn't like us all that much because we were doing that. And so our first years, there was a dramatic drop in the price of gypsum board and made us wonder, had we made the right decision? And so we looked at some allied products like asphalt roofing or even construction itself. By that time, we were in the ready-built house business in Lubbock. And Lubbock became known as a source for ready-built houses, which are movable. Build a house in a local, like on a building yard on Avenue A or 34th Street, and then hire a house mover to move it out. So we did that business for quite a few years, and we would haul 3-bedroom houses as far as the northern Texas Panhandle and even into southwestern Kansas. So later on, we did have another gypsum plant in New Mexico, which we bought. It was never all that successful. Later on, we built a brand new plant in Lawton, Oklahoma. But before I get to that, let me get to gypsum paperboard. Paperboard is the main raw material in making gypsum wallboard. When we first got started in this business, we and my colleagues at Avenger Lumber Company gathered for coffee at the Longhorn Cafe at 19th and A. I mean 34th and A. And so general conversation one day, it devolved around to my father looking straight at me and said, "I want a gypsum plant." My response to that was, "What is that?" Because I had always heard it referred to as sheetrock. which is a trademark name of United States Gypsum Company. And so you're very careful about using a trademark, somebody else's trademark name. And so we decided that maybe the best, and paperboard was a significant cost of making gypsum wallboard. Maybe it costs more than the gypsum itself. So it gave us the idea of getting into that business. So one day, our paper supplier, whom we'd been doing business with for years, and the Packaging Corporation of America, PCA, part of a very, very large company called Tenneco Inc. They called on us. The subject was long-term contracts for the supply of gypsum paper, facing paper. And so in the course of this conversation, the officer of this company said, well, we'll be glad to enter into a long-term supply agreement with you, but would you be interested in buying the plants? They had plants in Hutchinson, Kansas, and Denver, Colorado. And so, okay. So we've been buying from those two plants for quite a few years. And then, so they priced them to us for those two plants for $4 million. I think it was $4 million. Anyway, so that was what's called vertical integration, where you buy a supplier. So we mined the gypsum ourselves, and then we made the paper ourselves. And jokingly, my father would say one time, it's quite a good business. Dirt between two pieces of recycled or scrap paper, and you sell it for $400 a ton.
He thought that was a model that would work.
And so anyway, but it was a very profitable investment for us. I remember that the operating profit in the first 18 months was $4 million. So we earned enough. We earned the purchase price in 18 months.
That's quite a story. This will be the end of our episode for today, but we're going to ask Phil if he'll stay over and complete another episode for next week. Phil and David, thank you for joining us on this edition. Want to remind our listeners that all of our episodes are available on our website at classical1057.org. Appreciate you tuning in with us today, and please join us next week for another edition of Archive West Texas.